Wes Goldberg. We're starting our NBA tiers today, Eastern Conference first. And this cold open question I have for you, would it fit better for the West, but it's more timely for this first episode, so I'm just going to ask it. What are we going to stop having insane debates about Rudy Gobert? Not the pejorative
never.
we, not us we. Okay.
No, never. Yeah. Well, not for a very long time. I would say for probably 10 years. It'll be a while, because even when he eventually does retire, we're going to have the Hall of Fame debate. And then he's going to get into the Hall of Fame, and so that's going to become a thing, and that'll probably be a thing for about another year. So it's going to be a very long time. It's going to be between now and maybe a couple of years after Rudy Gobert retires. But you know how this works, Chris. Like, you watch Inside the NBA on TNT, and you still have Charles Barkley and Shaq bringing up stuff from the 90s. You know, they'll still bring it up. Like, Rudy Gobert will forever be one of the most polarizing players in NBA history, not just because of what he does on the court, but the whole COVID thing, the fact that the haul that he was traded for from Utah to Minnesota, he's going to just be one of the most polarizing figures in NBA history forever. And there will always be a podcast 20 years from now, or whatever we're doing when we're streaming information right into people's eyeballs, or whatever it is that we do, where somebody's going to revisit the Rudy Gobert trade and have a take on it and be like, the untold thing, what nobody told you back then about Rudy Gobert. Like, that will be a podcast 20 years from now.
Per Basketball Reference, 26% Hall of Fame probability.
Yeah, because his stats are like bad role player stats, but a guy with his Defensive Player of the Year resume is just going to get into the Hall of Fame. I strongly doubt that he's not going to end up in the Hall of Fame. What is it, 4 Defensive Player of the Years now for him?
It's 3 or 4. I mean, he's really good at defense and is
well,
a system into himself.
He's one of the great defenders of the generation. Yeah, maybe people, he's just really tall and he just stands there. Okay. He's one of the tallest humans on the planet. That counts for something. 4-time Defensive Player of the Year, 2018, 2019, 2021, and 2024. That's a heck of a run, man. Seven-time All-Defensive First Team. He's been a rebounding leader, a blocks leader, a 3-time All-Star, All-NBA Second Team once, All-NBA Third Team 3 times. Been a part of a lot of winning teams, right? Like, he's going to be in the Hall of Fame.
It's interesting too. So it's 25.9 to round up to 26. Players around him or ahead of him include Donovan Mitchell, Karl-Anthony Towns, Derrick Rose, John Wall, Tatum at this point, Doncic at this point. Those guys you'd think longevity, they're going to get in. DeRozan, Embiid, Klay Thompson, Jimmy Butler, Kevin Love, Draymond Green, Kyle Lowry, Kawhi.
So what's Draymond's?
Draymond is at 76%. Draymond has the 15th best Hall of Fame probability among active players from the Basketball Reference model. The Gobert, the drop-off really, so Embiid at 19th right now is at 66% Hall of Fame. The drop-off then goes to, yeah. And then, but DeRozan at 20 drops down to 46%. Luka's at 41. Tatum's at 32. Wall's at 32. Gobert's
John
at
Wall
20.
has a higher Basketball Reference. You're using the Basketball Reference stats, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at them. They have a big master list.
As soon as you told me that John Wall has a higher percentage chance than Rudy Gobert, I am going to stop looking at that stat. That is a worthless stat to me now. Thank you very much for enlightening me.
It's a little. Gobert should be higher than 26%.
Yeah, come on.
I understand like why Shaq goes at him and like why that makes good television, and also like that he is making so much money. But I also just think we have to just get over the fact that these guys are making like money that would have only been reserved for the best players in the world. Like, that is just the nature of NBA finance right now, is that like these guys you have to adjust your expectations for salary return on investment. We just do.
Yep.
Yeah. Right. Let's just have some peace in our time is really all I'm asking for. All right, on today's show, Eastern Conference tiers, we're going to look at the best teams in the league in the East, including the defending champ Boston Celtics, and run all the way down through the bottom of the barrel. We're going to start at the top, work our way down on today's Just Basketball Show.
Oh, a spectacular move by Michael Jordan. LeBron James with no regard for human life.
Hey there, welcome into the Just Basketball Show. I'm Chris Manning. That is Wes Goldberg. This is your twice weekly show covering all things hoops. If you haven't already, follow, rate, review on your podcast app platform of choice. Hit subscribe on the Just Basketball Fans YouTube channel, and check us out on TikTok, Instagram, and X. Support for today's episode of the Just Basketball Show comes from BetMGM. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code JustBasketball and you get up to $1,500 in a first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here is how it works. Step 1, download the BetMGM Sportsbook app on iOS or Android and sign up using code JustBasketball. Step 2, deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. Step 3, you receive up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if that bet loses. Just make sure to use bonus code JustBasketball when you sign up. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 21 or older to wager. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Wes, let's start at the very, very top. And I think we have to just start with the defending champs. And I think for me, the way I've put this in, I have this team labeled as in a class of their own. I think the Boston Celtics are the best team in the East. And I don't think it'd be right at this point to put another team in their tier at this point in time.
I'm with you. The Boston Celtics, they earned it. They've earned it. They've earned the number one tier. They earn it by themselves. They won the Eastern Conference by 14 games last year. Their net rating was a bazillion over everybody else. They cruised their way to the NBA title. They are on a tier unto themselves. And if we were to do this exercise, which we're not doing it because we're doing the Eastern Conference now, and we'll do the Western Conference in our next episode. But if we were going to do an episode of tiers for the entire NBA, I would still have the Celtics in a tier by themselves. They have earned that. And it's not to say that nobody else can come and climb into that tier with them. But right now, they're in a tier by themselves. Easy peasy.
There's no reason to me to think, like, there's some concern, right? If we were going to make a hater's case against the Celtics, you know, Al Horford's a year older. Did you get the best years of some of your wing guys yet? Was last year the best year of Jaylen Brown's career? Injury luck for them was very good last year. Aside from the Porzingis thing, but like, does Porzingis, you know, he coming off another injury now? When does he come back? What does he look like when he comes back? I think those are all valid concerns. I also just think, like, I would just bet that none of those ultimately, like, break it. It's not, I don't feel like this is the year they break the other way. I think we have at least one more year where all of this feels really well put together, and then, like, the age questions for Holiday and Horford really start. Horford probably a little more this year. I think some minute management makes a ton of sense for him for this year. If you can just eat a couple regular season losses and have Sam Hauser play some extra minutes or something, I think that's probably smart for your long-term championship viability for a season window. But I think the window is just clearly wide open for them to possibly repeat, and I think I would have them. The more and more I've thought about it, Wes, just like I think they're gonna get pushed in the East this year. There are some teams I really like. I do just think what they are, aside from bad luck, I think it would take, like, things that just go wrong in a weird way to really derail them in any major way.
Right, which we cannot predict. Obviously, if Jason Tatum tears his Achilles in the first week of the season, then they go down a tier. But when you look at this roster, the three best guys are probably still getting better in Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Derek White. Those, to me, are the three best players on this team. There are some guys whose stock are going down as sort of the age part of this creeps in with Kristaps Porzingis, Drew Holiday, and Al Horford. That's their top six. They're wildly important. It's the best top six in the NBA. They all fit really well. Joe Mazzulla is an awesome coach, and I think we got to give that guy his flowers because he did a great job coaching that team last year.
Did you see his quote the other day about the red dot? Did you see this by chance?
Yeah, shout out to John Corrales, who does great work on Locked On Celtics interviewing Joe Mazzulla, and he says, not only do we want the target, we don't want the target on our back. We want the target right on our forehead. I want to be able to see the red dot, and I want to know where the sniper is.
I hope I can see the red dot. Amazing stuff.
It's great.
Shout out.
Shout out. He's
John.
A psychopath. That guy's a psychopath, and I mean that in the kindest way possible. But yeah, the Celtics. I am a little concerned about Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford. If I'm gonna poke a hole in the Boston Celtics, it's that I think what made them unbeatable last season was when they had Porzingis playing the way he played, especially in Game 1 of the NBA Finals. That was Porzingis' best game of his career, most important game of his career, rather. And you could just see how that set the tone for basically the rest of the series and ultimately led to the Celtics winning the championship. So if they don't have that element, I think they become very good but beatable. And Al Horford did enough of a Kristaps Porzingis impression where when Porzingis was out and Al Horford was playing, You still were able to kind of play the same 5-out style. If Porzingis is going to be out for at least a couple of months here. We're probably not going to see him until 2025 because of this, crazy leg injury that he's dealing with. Al Horford's 38 years old, and he was already on a minutes limit last season. So you're not going to be able to play him every single night. So there's going to be nights where the Celtics are rolling out with like Xavier Tillman as their starting center or something like that. That is not a viable starting center. I like Xavier Tillman just fine. That is not a viable starting center for a championship team. And you can't really play the same way if Xavier Tillman's your starting center. You can't play 5-out. Nobody's going to guard him. Nobody's going to even close out on him. Nobody cares. So that's sort of my concern with Boston but that we're talking about the beginning of the season. When they get Porzingis back, though, a lot of those things go away because now you're not relying on Horford as much anymore. My big thing is if this is this rare leg injury for Kristaps Porzingis that we're not really sure how to deal with it, why are we assuming that he's going to just be good as gold when this guy comes back in January, February? Exactly. And this is a guy who gets hurt all the time. So I think Boston is a little flimsier than maybe we're giving them credit for, but I still have them in a tier by themselves because I think they've earned it at this point, and they just have fewer question marks than basically every other team we're going to talk about in the East and in the West.
Porzingis games played since he tore his ACL in his third year. Since he came back from an injury, 57 games, 43 games, 51 games, 34 games with Dallas, then 17 with, so 51, that's the same year, but 34 with Dallas, 17 with Washington, 65 with Washington, and then 57 in his first year with Boston. 55 games for Porzingis, where he's healthy for the playoffs, is I think what you're looking for. Honestly, and Wes, I think the thing we haven't said that would make me just feel like they're in their own tier is that they have the Jays. They have Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown in their primes. That having two wings like that who are all NBA caliber, who you'd expect to be on all NBA teams, like that's you're starting 10 yards ahead of everyone. Like it's first and one.
It is.
When you're on that.
It is, but they're also an ensemble, right? That's the strength of the Boston Celtics. So when you lose a really important part of that ensemble, you become a little bit more vulnerable. But yeah, I'm with you. When you've got Jason Tatum, you've got Jaylen Brown, you got Derek White, you got Drew Holiday. That's 4 of the top 60 players in the NBA. It's a great place to start. They're by themselves up here. I would say this, though, like going back to the Porzingis part, like 55 games and a healthy playoff run for Porzingis is great. They didn't even get that last year. Porzingis was out for most of the Eastern Conference playoffs last year. The East was really weak for a variety of different reasons. I don't think anybody expects the East to be as weak this postseason coming up.
No.
So if you don't, if you're basically without Porzingis for a round or two in the Eastern Conference playoffs, I could see the Celtics losing. I could.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good transition to Wes, a tier of 3 teams that I've put in here that have a real hope of pushing Boston. And you tell me if you would cut anyone from this or if you would add anyone to this. The New York Knicks, the Milwaukee Bucks, and the Philadelphia 76ers.
That's what I have. Same 3.
I would say for me right now, the team I give the best chance of pushing Boston is Philly. Where are you at on this?
I think I would agree with you on that. I like the 76ers. So I think most people would consider the 76ers or the Knicks. I would actually have the 76ers and then the Bucks and then the Knicks in terms of pushing the Celtics. What I like about what Philadelphia did this offseason is they doubled down on what it is that makes them special, which is Joel Embiid and Joel Embiid's 2-man game with Tyrese Maxey. They got his 3rd star and Paul George, who just fits seamlessly with those 2 guys. And Paul George is obviously a guy who can defend one of Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown on any given night. And then they have some other parts like Caleb Martin, Kelly Oubre, these other guys who are able to credibly at least defend those guys. What the Knicks are trying to do is beat the Celtics at their own game. They're trying to play a little bit smaller at the 5. They let Hartenstein go. They doubled down on wing depth. This is all the same stuff. Everybody on the perimeter for them, other than Jalen Brunson, can defend. But I don't see them being better at what Boston does than Boston. And so that's my biggest concern with the Knicks. I think to beat the Celtics, which is like this Swiss movement, beautifully crafted watch, you need a hammer to just break the watch open. And that, to me, is what the 76ers built. It's Joel Embiid just being bigger and badder than everybody else. Now, obviously, you've got health questions with the Sixers and with Joel Embiid. That's a whole other thing. But if they're healthy, I like their ability to beat Boston because you got to play a different game and then be better at that than what Boston can do to you. And then ditto from the Milwaukee Bucks. If we're talking about hammers, there's no greater hammer in the league than Giannis, who led the league in dunks last year. Quite literally, the hammer. So you've got Giannis. You got the two-man game with Damian Lillard. I think they'll be a little bit better than they were last year. I think I'm still higher on than consensus on Milwaukee than most. Just
You're
because
higher than them on me for sure.
They just still have
very
Giannis,
skeptical.
so I can't rule him out. He could be the best player on the planet again this year.
Yeah. One last thing about the Knicks: are you underrating the power of friendship? Is really my question here. Like, are you?
Yeah,
okay,
friendship is really overrated. The last time I checked, Chris, best friends didn't win the championship.
LeBron and Wade.
No, I mean that was talent, right? Like Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan were the best of friends during their days in Toronto, and they still got beat every year in the Eastern Conference playoffs. Friendship is helpful. Friendship only gets you so far, right? That's like the Knicks were awesome last year because Jalen Brunson had a top 5 MVP year. That's why the Knicks were awesome. The Knicks were awesome last year because Dante DiVincenzo and Josh Hart outplayed their contract values. Isaiah Hartenstein played himself into a $30 million contract. You think the Thunder gave Isaiah Hartenstein a $30 million contract because he's a good guy? No, he's an awesome basketball player. Tom Thibodeau was an awesome coach last year. The friendship thing was so overrated. I know you asked me that facetiously, and I appreciate you kind of teeing it up for me and letting me slam it out of the park here. Yeah. But I am so over like the Villanova vibes and the fact that they all have a podcast together. Because
so you're not subscribed to the Roommate Show, is what you're telling me.
I actually don't subscribe to any player-hosted podcast. I see the clips on my social media feeds, and that's what. And like, I'm not in throwing shade. I just don't happen to subscribe to any of them. Like, they have great value. There's great stories. Those stories tend to make their way into my timeline, and I consume them that way.
Yeah, that's more than valid. Philly, I think we've hit on a ton in the last couple months. I think it's just worth saying with them, they have Embiid, who could be the best player in the world this year, could like win an MVP again, entirely possible. George is an incredible ad for them. I love the work they did to round out this roster in the summer. Like I just think like even if they are primed with Drummond, like Andre Drummond deserves credit for really reinventing himself, like post the Cleveland flameout. He has really and the weird stuff in LA. He has really developed into just like, I know what I am. I'm gonna get rebounds. I'm gonna contest shots. I'm gonna try to finish. And he's very
like,
flawed.
He's like second stint Lakers Dwight Howard, who helped them win a championship.
Yeah. Having that guy to back up Embiid, so Embiid like has like a slightly sore ankle one night. It's like, take the night off. It's okay. Like, we can play the long game. They are equipped to play the long game because of
not
Andre
just that,
Drummond.
but they also have Paul George and Tyrese Maxey to score some points.
But even just like but just Embiid's like maintenance and not needing to like play through stuff like and say like we you don't have to be so stubborn and fight through like a knee twist like Andre
and then he could
like,
be healthy for the playoffs. And I also think Philadelphia, in terms of pushing Boston, I think they're going to win a ton of regular season games. I think this team is built to win a ton of regular season games. I think they're going to win 60 games this year if everybody's able to stay moderately healthy. Even if you put Embiid on a little bit of a maintenance program where he doesn't play the second nights of back-to-backs and you give him one night off every couple of weeks, they could still kind of cruise their way to 60 wins. And I don't see Boston coming out in the same way that they did last year, again, winning the Eastern Conference by 14 games. I just don't see them coming out with that kind of prioritization of the regular season. They know what they can do. They just got to be a top 3 or 4 seed in the East, and they know they can get to the finals. But if the Sixers end up being the number 1 seed, that just makes the path to an NBA Finals a lot easier for them, right? And so in terms of pushing the Celtics, I like Philadelphia. Milwaukee, by the way, and this is what I keep saying, it was a season from hell last year for the Milwaukee Bucks. They still finished 3rd in the East. Like, this is a regular season wins machine as long as they have Giannis. That's another team that I wouldn't sleep on getting the number 1 seed. And if that happens, who knows?
Can I just read you the roster for a second? Like this is I agree with you. Giannis, you could have a bounce back year from Dame. Giannis is in his prime. Maybe Middleton's a little healthier this year. Maybe just a normal full Doc Rivers year, even if we don't think of Doc Rivers as the best coach in the world, can be more successful than them than what Adrian Griffin was. That's
another regular season wins guy.
Yeah.
Postseason problems have been well documented.
Yes. But it's Dame. It's ranked in, this is salary. So Dame and Giannis making the same amount. Then Middleton, Brook, Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, AJ Johnson, Marshawn Beauchamp, AJ
Yeah,
Green,
so
DeLon Wright,
there's
Gary
a clear
Trent, Taurean
delineation
Prince.
there, right?
And
You get-
that's what scares me compared to
For
the other
sure.
teams in this list. It's like the Knicks deep as hell. The Celtics obviously deep as hell. Philly, I like their depth more. Even if they assembled it in similar ways on the fringes, Philly's depth to me, particularly just because they got lucky with the Caleb Martin situation and Caleb Martin agent messing that up for Caleb Martin's bank account. They came out better with depth. They have the worst depth to me of the teams that we're thinking about as top tier East teams.
But they have Giannis.
But they have Giannis.
So no, I think there's you have holes up and down this second tier, right? With Philadelphia, I think there's a major question of, are they really starting Caleb Martin at the 4? Because the Heat tried that and it was not viable long term. That would be my concern with Philadelphia. Joel Embiid obviously bigger than Bam Adebayo on the back line. That helps them a little bit more in terms of answering the size. They have Paul George there who could play the 4 a little bit in name also. They have some options, Kelly Oubre, whatever. But that's a concern for me. I know they added Yabusele. You and I love Yabusele. We got a lot of stock in Yabusele. We still don't know if Yabusele is an NBA player, right? So that's the concern with Philly, and then obviously the health of Joel Embiid in general. With Milwaukee, the depth is definitely an issue. With the Knicks, I wonder, like we talked about Boston's concern at center in terms of health. I mean, the Knicks see your concerns at center with health and raise you one Mitchell Robinson, right?
Yeah.
Because they are very reliant on Mitchell Robinson to play a lot of games, and he's probably not gonna. And then behind him, you've got Jericho Sims, Precious Achua. They're going to have to play OG Anunoby and Julius Randle at the 5. That's what Knicks fans will tell. Oh, we're going to play small this year. Okay, cool.
Those
OG
are not
Anunoby
Tibbs.
Also extremely injury prone.
Yeah.
And Julius Randle coming off of major injuries and a major surgery. So there might be nights, and there's probably going to be a night where Tom Thibodeau is looking at his rotation in January and saying, am I playing Josh Hart at center tonight? Because that's my only option. And so, and that's my concern with the Knicks. Also, they don't have they don't really have a second creator, unless you they're going to be really reliant on Julius Randle. He could be that guy if he has a bounce back year. I guess Mikal Bridges is more of a third offensive option than a second offensive option, but he's good enough. Dante DiVincenzo, maybe you kind of just do it as like the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts kind of deal. But there's concerns with all 3 of these teams, is my point.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think with the Knicks, the center question's a good one, because I would add on top of the Mitchell Robinson injury concerns, I would add 2 things. Number one, Hartenstein was so good last year, and it's why he got a massive amount of money from the Thunder, because he's really good at that interior passing. He was creating good shots at the rim for his teammates with passing. That is not exactly what Mitchell Robinson brings to the table. He's a great offensive rebounder, good rim protector, but he doesn't give you that same secondary kind of pressure release valve stuff from the center spot. He just doesn't. Achua does not either. Secondly, the unorthodox, not even unorthodox, but like more modern center solutions are not things that I think we have seen Tibbs super willing to embrace. Like other coach, if you took another average NBA coach, and Tibbs I think is above average, but if you just took like Mike Brown from, maybe he's not the best example, but like take Ime Udoka from Houston and threw him into the Knicks and said, okay, what does a different coach give you in this environment? I think you'd be more likely to see Randall at center. I think you'd be more likely to see Anunoby play some center and see Josh Hart play some center and embrace the weirdness of the roster. Tibbs fully embracing that part of this team's identity, I think, is necessary for this team to get to reach their ceiling. And I think we're going to find out how willing he is to do some of that work that I, again, think is highly necessary for this team to hit whatever ceiling they're going to hit.
Yeah, there's a version of this Knicks team where everything clicks. They embrace small ball. Thibodeau kind of throws that curveball that nobody's expecting, and that becomes their identity. And they're extremely versatile, and they're extremely dangerous, and they're way more unpredictable than they were last season, which kind of bit them at the end, right? Like, this is a team that still just made the second round of the playoffs. That's how far they got 2 seasons ago. There's all these great vibes in New York, but they've been a second round and out team in the Eastern Conference the last 2 years. So they needed to push it. They needed to evolve. So in that sense, I don't mind the changeup. And by the way, it's not like they let Hartenstein walk. They were trying to bring him back, and the Thunder threw $30 million at him. So it just didn't work. But if this doesn't work, if this changeup for the Knicks doesn't work, there's going to be Knicks fans who look at the Mikal Bridges acquisition and everything that it cost, all the first-round picks, and say, Are we sure we wouldn't have been better off keeping all those first-round picks and just bringing back Hartenstein?
It's an entirely valid question. Wes, let me ask you this broadly about these three teams. We have I think, three different ideas of how to beat the Knicks or how to beat Boston. You have the Knicks, who are Boston styled, saying we're going to match strength for strength. Philly is obviously they have a superstar, but it is we're going to attack you from a different way. And the Bucks are a flat out, I think, talent bet. They are maybe the best player in the world. Dame, Middleton, Lopez. We're betting on the high end talent. Which of those models do you think is if you were designing a team in a lab, constructing on an NBA front office, which version of this attack plan to beat Boston in the East would you want to latch onto?
I would probably go with Philadelphia. Although I would really, if I'm starting in the lab with one ingredient, I would want Giannis.
Yes,
That's the guy I want because he can go right through Kristaps Porzingis. He can go right through Al Horford. Tatum and Brown are not going to stop him. The Celtics can build a wall, and that could definitely help. But now that you've got Damian Lillard there, that's sort of the guy who makes you extend the wall. And once you extend the wall, obviously it's no longer a wall. So, but you already hit on the depth and the Chris Middleton questions. It's so flimsy. I don't see how they could possibly defend the Boston Celtics, and so that's my main concerns, is that unless Giannis is scoring 60 points a night, it kind of feels like it's going to be a problem for Milwaukee in a series against Boston. So I'm going to go with Philadelphia. Kristaps Porzingis has done an okay job guarding Joel Embiid. Embiid, as we know, he wants to get to that mid-range pull-up. He wants to kind of shoot from three, and Porzingis has enough length to bother him, and so he's done that. We saw that last year in the Celtics 76ers matchups, but now that you add another year of Tyrese Maxey and Embiid together, you add Paul George to the mix. I just think there's enough there and you have enough wing defenders too. You've got Caleb Martin, you've got Kelly Oubre on that roster, as well as Paul George. So you've got guys you could throw at Tatum and Brown, unlike what Milwaukee has, and you still have a hammer in Joel Embiid, although not as dynamic a hammer as Giannis. He's still a hammer. He could still be more physical, more dominant than anybody on the Celtics, because you're not going to out-depth the Celtics, right? They're always going to be the deeper, more complete team, the team that fits better. The one thing you can do is have the better player on the floor. And Philadelphia and Milwaukee both have better players, one singular better player than the Celtics have. And that's going to be how you beat the Celtics. But you're just going to need the supporting cast to step up too.
I think you are right that the first ingredient I would want is Giannis. Of the star players, he's the most, I think, unguardable among these guys. I think the issue when I come up with Milwaukee specifically is I think Boston's incredibly well equipped to defend Dame.
Yep.
Like, Dame could still cook, but is it going to be as efficient? Is it as efficient as you need when Derek White, Andrew Holiday, and Tatum and Brown and all of that can be thrown at you? That's a really tough ask for Dame. That just, even if Dame was 28, I think that would still be a tough ask. That's just a bludgeoning of really,
I
really
think
good
for
guard
Milwaukee
defenders.
though, it's like the two-man. How does the two-man game sort of multiply everybody's impact, right? Between Giannis,
How many
and Dame.
pick and rolls are they going to run, Wes? Are we
Well,
going
they
to talk
have
about
to.
this all year again? I know, but it's
they got to do it.
But here
But
we
now
go.
they do have a full training camp with Damian Lillard. They've got Doc Rivers, who does tend to get guys to buy into a system. I think we'll see more of it this year. I also think Giannis is pissed. I think he's pissed about being overlooked. I think he's pissed about how this team has performed in the playoffs the last 2 years. They're gonna want to do something this year, and I think that's enough to get Giannis to buy into setting a few more screens and for Dame to play that kind of style also.
Philly's the answer for me to my own question.
Yep.
It just is. It is the situation with Embiid, with Maxey, even if they can throw a lot at him. It's really the Paul George thing, I think, on top of it. Like, Paul George is such a good counterweight that both fits Philly style and can kind of push on what works with the Boston side of things. Like, if he defends one of Tatum and Brown at a really high level for a whole series, and like Oubre and Yabusele and like all those other guys do a passable enough Caleb Martin do a passable enough job on the other J, you're an Embiid can, I think, do what he does, and if he's healthy, like you're in a really good spot, I think, to really press Boston at some key points. So I think Philly has to be the answer here.
Yep. Should we go to the next tier?
Yeah. Robust middle class. I have 3 teams in here. and there's one team I've cheekily
Okay,
left
so I'm
out.
already going to disagree with you then. All right, go ahead. Give me your 3.
Cleveland, Indiana, Orlando.
Okay. So I have Miami in this tier.
So Wes, I have a thing in what I did, and they're technically in this tier, but I did a whole thing because I wanted to clear out and let you cook for a minute later to talk about the Heat. I just had the Miami Heat tier where the Heat are in their own tier.
Okay. Well, let's just do this now then. Why do you have the Heat in your own tier? Because that's kind of the crux of this whole thing.
Because they're just kind of weird, man. Like that's kind of why. It's just like I don't know what to expect from Jimmy Butler. I believe Spo is great and all of that. I love Bam. I think Bam, I would be looking at a Bam Future Defensive Player of the Year award every single year. You know, maybe like Wemby's just going to eat all of them up, but Bam is good enough to win that award. Just with the Jimmy thing and his age, with what the roster is, you know, banking on another good year from Kevin Love as a bench guy, Hawkes taking a step forward. You know, you lost Caleb Martin. It's just like, what is this team exactly? I just kind of want to see it. And I would, it's also just, again, it's a Jimmy Butler thing. Like, how much Jimmy Butler are you going to get? What is Hero this year? Like, there's just a lot of questions that make me just a little, like, I feel like I know what Cleveland's identity, even with the new coach, is probably going to be. We know what Indiana's is, and we know what Orlando's is, particularly adding KCP. They're doubling down on a strength. Miami, aside from the fact that they are the Heat and we know kind of what that energy is, I need to see kind of how it plays out for like a month before I can lock them into that robust middle class.
I hear all the things that you're saying. I agree with it. I've been talking about all that stuff on Locked On Heat for the last 5 months, it feels like. All those things were true of this team last year, and they were still within 2 games of all the teams on that other tier that you mentioned, Indiana, Cleveland, and Orlando. So even with all the questions and over identity and what kind of Jimmy Butler are we going to get and what kind of growth are you going to get from these young guys, this is still a team that just wins 45 games a year. They just do. Mm-hmm. You can't knock them down further than that, or it's very difficult to do it. So I have them in that same tier as the Pacers, the Cavs, and the Magic. I think if we were going to rank the teams within the tier, they could be the best team in that tier, or they could be the worst team in that tier, based on all the things that we're already talking about. I don't really know where it's going to go, but I feel pretty confident that they're going to be within striking distance, within a few games of those teams. And I really look at that next tier of teams in the Eastern Conference, and I'm like, yeah, the Heat are definitely better than those teams, because there's a pretty dramatic gap between the teams that we've already talked about and the next set of teams that we're going to talk about. So I've got the Heat just in that tier by themselves.
You've convinced me. I've put them in there.
Okay, I've convinced you. All right, I feel bad about putting the Pacers in this tier. They were in the Eastern Conference Finals last year.
Yeah.
I love Tyrese Haliburton and Pascal Siakam. We're going to get a full year of Pascal Siakam in Indiana. We're going to get presumably a healthy Tyrese Haliburton coming off of a gold medal Olympic run. I like their offseason just fine. I think they're doing all the right things. I think their young guys are only going to get better. They're going to have Benedict Mathurin back as another sort of tool in the toolbox. And their identity is a strength of theirs. They'll win games just because of how fast they play. And I think that's an underrated part of that team. I just still can't. Do you feel bad about putting them in this tier and not with Philly, Milwaukee, and the Knicks? Because we just did a whole segment basically on like all of our concerns about those 3 teams. And I have concerns about the Pacers, but are they not as good? Do they not belong in that tier? Because you and I have them in this tier.
I think it's possible they get there. I think where I hedged in my head, Wes, was just, is this the Hawks from a couple years ago where it was like something of a little bit of an overperformance? Could I be over-indexing that? Could I be overthinking that? Absolutely, I could. We could be underlooking something about that Pacers team. I do think it's worth noting that they found a lot better balance after the Siakam trade.
Yep.
Like that was not just such an offensive team first and foremost. Like they had a good two-way sensibility to them that allowed them, I think, to make that run. I like a lot of the talent there. Carlisle's a good coach. I just think I am hedging a little bit on, okay, did the Eastern Conference Finals run in a weird Eastern Conference where like none of the other teams fully acquitted themselves that well? Like no other team besides Boston like really was that good in the playoffs in a consistent way.
I don't mean to argue with you because I had them in this tier, but the more we're talking through it, the more I feel like I want to move them up a tier, because you're right about the Eastern Conference being a little bit weaker, but they beat the Knicks. The Knicks were the healthy team. They were a team that we have them in that tier over them now. And I like the Mikal Bridges trade just fine. It wasn't enough for me. Like, that's not the reason I moved him into that second tier. I would have always had him in the second tier, even if they kept Hartenstein and didn't get Mikal Bridges. So,
all right, let's move the Pacers up.
did we talk ourselves into it? I think we did.
I think let's put some respect in the Indiana Pacers' name. I have them at the bottom of that tier, to be clear. Like, I absolutely think that is the worst team with the worst chance of pushing Boston at this point, just because, like, I still just like the Knicks' identity better, and I like other wing depth.
What would it? Yeah, that's the problem. Is that Indiana is kind of shallow. And by the way, like, if Nembhard doesn't win, it doesn't hit that shot at the end of Game 3, was it, in the second round against the Knicks?
Yeah.
Then the Knicks are playing the Celtics, so it was by a hair that they beat
Still
the
did
Knicks.
it. I mean, still
But
did
they
it.
still
So
did it.
like, yeah.
And if they played them that closely, then I guess they deserve to be considered within that group. It's Aaron Nesmith and Pascal Siakam who are going to be guarding the wings in Boston. If we kind of have that same conversation we just had about Milwaukee, Philly, and New York, like, how did the Pacers match up against Boston? Well, we saw it in the Eastern Conference Finals, and they played them pretty well. All things considered, it feels like their depth needs to be rounded out, but they have enough youth there, enough young guys where maybe there's something you could feel good about. I also think they're another team that can make a move midseason, and go get another piece. So let's put respect on their name. Let's move the Pacers into that second tier. I think they deserve it.
Yeah. I think, too, it's if Halliburton, him just not, like, that hamstring clearly bothered him all of last year.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I don't want to just be like, if they sailed it, because that's the case for every team. But him in particular is such an engine of what they do that if he is just, like, has a year where he plays 75 games or 73 games or something and is mostly healthy and isn't clearly, like, 1 out of every 4 games can put up the peak of Tyrese Halliburton in the playoffs, like, that makes them all the more dangerous. Because if you look at, like, the guys, it's like the only guy in that middle class tier, the Cavs, the Magic, and the Heat, that I kind of have at that offensive can just nuke a game for you right now. It's like really him and Donovan are at the top of that list to me right now, or the guys that could just absolutely cook and cause some problems. Like, Donovan did do that in the playoffs last year. He has a track record of doing it, with Indiana, or excuse me, with Utah back in the day. Like, they have that factor that makes them dangerous and makes them scary. And he's at the level where, like, I could see him, even if it's really good guarding, like, good offense in the NBA does beat great individual one-on-one defense.
He is
100%.
Fill in the blank. Halliburton is a top blank player in the NBA.
12?
Yeah, I was kind of like going rounder numbers, 15, but yeah, he's there.
Yeah, it's
he's
like 12 to
there.
15. Yeah.
Yep. All right, so that's our tier. Let's talk a little bit about the other group. Then we've got Miami, Orlando, and Cleveland now. Miami's my team. Cleveland's your team. The thing about now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams in a clear top 2 tiers. You get 6 guaranteed playoff spots, and then 4 teams in the play-in tournament. That means that one of Miami, Cleveland, and Orlando, barring some injuries to one of these top teams in front of them, 2 of those teams are going to end up in the play-in tournament.
Yeah,
that's pretty crazy.
It's absolutely scary for one of these teams, and they could win 46, 47 games and end up there because the bottom of the East isn't good, so they're going to, you'd think, rack up some wins there, but the top of these could be so competitive that they just get pushed down as a result, and you're like the 7 seed, and it's like, okay, we had a great year. We actually feel like we took a step forward, but the standings don't reflect that. That is very much on the table for Cleveland and Orlando in particular. I think 2 teams at a certain stage of their organizational life, going through some things, figuring stuff out. Orlando, obviously, Franz and Paolo leading that upward charge. Double down on the identity with KCP coming in. Cleveland, they get the Kenny Atkinson hire this summer, stuck with their big 4 against seemingly all odds. Like, these are teams with, I think, a lot riding on like where they go from this year. And if they're like the 7 seed and then lose in the first round to Philly or Boston, whomever, like that's a really tough reality, even if you can look at the regular season and say, we did improve this year. It's just the standings and our end result doesn't actually reflect that.
And all these teams were a couple of games within each other last year, right? They were all sort of fighting for that last guaranteed playoff seed. So Miami feels like this could be like the last round of the Jimmy Butler era, potentially. If he opts out next summer, like this might be his last best chance. But you also have Jimmy Butler kind of in a contract year. He's approaching this as a contract year. If you get an engaged, motivated Jimmy Butler in the regular season, the Heat could go up a tier. Like that's all it takes for them to move up a tier here. They were 8-1 last season, Chris, when Jimmy Butler had a usage rating of 30% or more. So in other words, when Jimmy Butler played like a star, this team was almost unbeatable. And he just didn't last year for most of the season, and that was their biggest problem. So if you get that, then I think you can move Miami up a tier potentially. Cleveland, I don't know that there's a more talented starting five in the Eastern Conference when you just kind of consider, okay, like all-star caliber players, all NBA caliber players, other than Boston and Philadelphia, right? And they're obviously down a tier, but if they can kind of put it all together under Atkinson, then maybe they can. Then maybe this is a team that can move up a tier. Orlando, of all the teams that we're talking about, they're the team with like the most sort of seeds planted and things that could blossom, right? Like what if Paolo Banchero just takes this dramatic leap this year? Franz Wagner turns into an all-star. Paolo gets into an all-NBA level. Jalen Suggs takes another leap. Maybe they get something out of like this Jet Howard, Anthony Black kind of group. Maybe De Silva, who they drafted in June, is something for them. Like there's a lot of ways that things can go right for Orlando. They're really well coached. So you can kind of talk yourself into why all these teams can have an awesome season. And I think all their fan bases are, right? Like if you're a Heat fan, if you're a Cavs fan, if you're the Magic fan, I think you got to feel pretty good about what you've got going on going into this year. And yet two of these teams are probably going to end up in the play-in tournament, which is pretty wild.
Let's sit on Cleveland for a second, because I think there's two guys I'm really thinking about for this year for them in the Kenny Atkinson era, I guess we'll call it. I don't know if it's really a Kenny Atkinson era, but the Kenny Atkinson version of this team. He's a version of this team. I think about Darius Garland a lot because Kenny Atkinson as when he was head coach of Brooklyn, had a great track record of getting a lot out of multi-guard systems, multi-guard pairings, and was really good at developing point guards. Darius Garland, I think, could really be a bounce-back year. We remember why this guy was an all-star a couple years ago candidate. I love his decision-making at its best. Last year was a season from hell from him. He got whacked in the face right away, just never seemed healthier in a rhythm. Atkinson's job to make him and Mitchell work and feel more connected, I think, is a big bellwether for what this season is going to look like. I think he is, to me, one of the 10 most interesting players in the league this year, just because I believe in him so much, and I'll be watching closely, and I think there's a lot riding on what he does. Evan Mobley is the other one. Mobley at the 5 in the playoffs, to me, was intriguing enough where I was like, I think they might trade Jared Allen. And instead, they extended Jared Allen. So what does Evan Mobley look like when they haven't really cleared out a path for him to play a bunch of center? They already split him and Allen's minutes a lot last year when they were both healthy. And how does Atkinson try to solve for that pairing and really get the most out of Evan Mobley, who did sign a rookie max extension this summer? Like those two guys, the core young guys that were drafted before Mitchell got here, are vital to where this team's going. And I think a big part of his job is to get those guys kind of feeling like they're back on an upward trajectory in a major way.
It's similar to what Chris Finch and his job was when he took over Minnesota and making the Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns thing work, right? And he had a couple of guards, and Anthony Edwards and D'Angelo Russell, who didn't work together, and they ended up trading Russell and got a guy who could work with him in Mike Conley. And, you fill out the rest of the roster the way that you do. But it's very similar for Atkinson, right? He's got to figure out how to get Evan Mobley and Jared Allen to work together. He's got to figure out how to get Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell to work together. I like that they didn't make any major changes, because this could have been a disaster offseason for Cleveland, right? Like, you could have not gotten Donovan Mitchell to re-sign on the contract extension. Maybe you have to trade him somewhere else. Maybe Darius Garland. We heard the rumors that he was flirting with maybe the Lakers or something like that. Maybe he has to get traded. Maybe you have to split up Jared Allen, who got torched in that anonymous sources story by the Athletic. Maybe you have to move him.
And by Marcus Morris on the record, just like on a Chandler Parsons show, basically calling him soft. It was like wild stuff, honestly.
It's almost like a 1% chance, a 10% chance that this was going to be the team going into this season. But the Cavs front office obviously decided, okay, let's see what Atkinson can do with this roster before we make any major decisions going forward. But those major decisions can happen between now and February, right? They could make a big deal before the trade deadline if some of this stuff doesn't work. My biggest concern with the Cavs and the way they built their roster is that you already said, like, your future is dependent on sort of the two guys that were there before Donovan Mitchell got there, Darius Garland and Evan Mobley, and how they grow. My concern is that they don't fit with the best players on the roster. I think the two best players on this team are Donovan Mitchell and Jared Allen. And are you gonna force Evan Mobley to be this corner 3-point shooter defender guy where maybe he has a little bit more, or maybe he doesn't. Maybe they decide that's what he's going to be. He's not a natural three-point shooter. They've been forcing him to learn how to take threes because Jared Allen isn't going to do it. So you've got that whole thing going on. Garland and Mitchell have plenty of problems playing together. And I don't know that you want to take the ball out of Donovan Mitchell's hands because he's so dynamic when he has the ball in his hands. Do you really just want Darius Garland's job to be bring the ball up and pass it to Donovan Mitchell? Or do you want him to run the offense? And if he's running the offense, what does that do with Donovan Mitchell? It's very similar to DeJounte Murray and Trae Young and the reason why that didn't work. So the roster still doesn't make sense to me, and I don't know that it's ever going to unless these guys change their games and one of these guys, two of these guys change their games in a dramatic way, and I don't know that you want that. I don't know that you want them to change their games in a dramatic way. So look, I guess that's why you hire Atkinson and you pay him millions and millions of dollars because I guess it's his job to figure it out because I can't see how it works in a way where it all clicks and this team can win a championship, even though they have inarguably championship-level talent. So maybe it's one deal. Maybe it's not a whole bunch of stuff that has to happen. Maybe it's one deal that makes everything click into place, the way that Minnesota moved D'Angelo Russell for Mike Conley, and then boom, everything just kind of worked after that. Maybe there's this kind of deal out there for Cleveland. But yeah, right now, I would rather be in their situation than some of the other situations we're about to talk about, though, because at least they have the resources to pivot with, where some of these other teams, it just feels like it's no man's land for them. But I will go to the next tier here, because I think you and I are going to agree on this. Actually, maybe not. I have in my next tier, and you can tell me if you disagree here, Chris. I've got Chicago, Atlanta, Toronto, and Charlotte in my next tier, my fourth tier.
Repeat that for me one more time.
Chicago, Atlanta, Toronto, and Charlotte.
I had Charlotte one tier lower, but I don't really feel great about that because I think the upside is there. And then I also look at the other teams in that tier.
Yeah, they're better than Detroit, Washington,
and
Brooklyn. Like
they should be.
They should be. Those three teams, Brooklyn, Detroit, Washington, have no upside. Like there's a world where the four teams, Chicago, Atlanta, Toronto, Charlotte, can compete for a spot in the play-in tournament. That's not going to happen for Brooklyn, Detroit, or Washington.
There is something. The Atlanta Hawks, I think, more than any other team on this list, Wes, are like a story of what the modern NBA is. Because I think it's like you can get a star, you can have success, and you can make one wrong, really bold move, and it can just totally implode in your face.
Yep.
And they have a top 5 coach. I love Quinn Snyder. I love how he designs stuff. Maybe not top 5 based on the recent work, but like him in Utah, but a very, very good coach. A coach I think that could like coach a team to a championship. Like wouldn't shocked if in the future he's here or elsewhere and like wins a title. He's that good of a coach. But they are like teams that suck just a little bit less than they aren't quite as bad as the bottom of the barrel, but they're not in that middle class because I think their best case is like the 9th or 10th seed. And two of these, like I think Toronto and Chicago should not really have any, and even Charlotte to a lesser degree, should not really feel the type of, if they're like the 11th seed and they put up a valiant fight all year, like that's fine. That's cool. The Hawks should be like, I think pretty alarmed if like even just considering who they did not trade away this summer and the age of some of the guys on the roster and having Trae Young, it's like, if you're not like the 10th seed, like what are we even doing here? Like,
I also think they have a higher floor than those other 4 teams, right? Or those other 3 teams.
Because of Trae, because of Quinn Snyder, because of Okongwu, because of Capella, because of Jalen Johnson.
Yeah, and so I don't see this team ending up like in the bottom 5 unless there's some major injury. But I think the other thing with the Hawks too is that there's a lot on the line this year because they don't own a lot of their future draft picks, right? They still owe some of these picks in the DeJounte Murray deal, so they have a lot on the line. Where Chicago, it feels like they're going the other way, right? The Chicago by letting DeMar DeRozan go, trading Caruso for Giddey, and getting younger at that spot, it feels like they're doing a soft tank. Charlotte, they're first year under a new coach with Charles Lee. I think they'd be happy to just get a healthy LaMelo Ball back and see Brandon Miller take a step, and hopefully Dejan Saloon ends up being good, and Mark Williams can come take a step.
And it's like, what do we have? Like you get to April and
it's what do we have season. Yeah. Toronto feels like closer to Atlanta, where they've been out of the playoff mix for a couple of years now, and they need to show something. They really need Scotty Barnes to take in that next step. They've got RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, Jakob Poeltl. Like there's some good, starting caliber players there that they kind of need to take another step. But if they don't, it wouldn't be the end of the world. Unless you're a Raptors fan, I guess, because they seem to be a little impatient right now. But I think these four teams are the four teams that are going to be competing for those last two play-in spots, right? 9 and 10 in the Eastern Conference. We kind of already talked about this last week, the next three teams, but that tier to me is really clear. It's Detroit, Brooklyn, and Washington.
Yep.
These teams are going nowhere, and they're fine with that. Brooklyn is meant to go nowhere. They had maybe the best offseason in the league because they have gone nowhere really fast. So that's great. Washington, Detroit, they just have so many roster construction problems and sort of just questions throughout the organization that's sort of like they have to figure that part out before they take any meaningful steps. But the way I always describe Detroit and Washington this season, your job is to just pick a path and get on that path. Like find the rails, get on the rails. So you've got to become a serious organization because it just felt like for the last couple of years, Detroit and Washington have been the most unserious teams in the NBA. Your whole job this season, if you're the Wizards and if you're the Pistons, is to just get serious. That's your whole job. I don't care about wins. I don't care about losses. None of that matters. It's just be a serious team. That's your job.
Do you think the Pistons could move up to that next tier and then like the Bulls like slide down? Like, is that off the table to you?
It's not off the table. I love Cade Cunningham. I'm a big Cade Cunningham guy. The problem is I don't love much else of the roster. I like Jalen Duren fine, but they have one good NBA player that we know for sure. You know what I mean? Like Tobias Harris is a nice addition for him. I'm not like what are we really getting at Tobias Harris this year?
Yeah.
They have 1.5 good NBA players that we know for sure. They could end up between Thompson, Ivy, Duren, maybe Ron Holland, the guy they picked in the top 5 this year, ends up being awesome as a rookie. Between those 4 guys, maybe 2 or 3 of them pop. That would be the best case scenario for Detroit, and they do climb up into that next tier. They're probably the team out of this group that has the best chance to do it, to answer your question. Yeah.
I think it's entirely possible that them and the Bulls just like switch spots just because like the Bulls are clearly, I feel, primed to just like experiment a little bit more, and they could dump Vooch somewhere. They could try to dump Zach LaVine somewhere. Like it just feels like they feel like intent on shedding things.
Right.
And the Pistons feel like they are going to keep adding things.
Chicago should probably want to be in this tier. They're probably upset that we put them in a tier above them because they're trying to tank. But
trying to make sense of anything the Bulls have ever done post Michael Jordan is just like good fucking.
This
luck.
is the
it's
offseason
like really
that has made the most sense for them out of all of the offseasons since NBA left. But
probably since like that's probably a little slightly unfair. It's probably since like the Joakim, Derrick Rose, Boozer years. It's probably
since basically their biggest mistake was not paying Jimmy Butler the extension when he wanted it. Yep. And that kind of torpedoed the whole organization for a very long time.
3 alphas a year era, baby.
I mean, they still have Zach LaVine on the roster. So it's who they traded Jimmy Butler for. So there's a lot of concerns there. But the problem, my biggest problem with Detroit is I don't know who's going to make a 3 all season for them. Even if some of these players are good, it doesn't really feel like any of them fit together. That's okay. I think trying to establish fit this early in your kind of rebuild life is pointless. I don't think you're trying to find fit. I think you're just trying to establish who are our good players, and then once you get that, then you try to find the pieces that fit around them. So I'm okay with that. So I think Detroit will be in more games. I think they can be competitive. I just don't think they're going to win a lot of them.
If JB Bickerstaff can establish a boring but competent defensive identity, they're in business. Like that in itself would be a huge win for the Pistons.
Yeah, if Jalen Duren can take a meaningful step up, then you have him, Thompson, who's an awesome defender already. Tobias Harris is fine. Cade Cunningham at least has size at his position, and if he's healthy and engaged, I think he could be really good defensively. There's the potential for this to be like a top 10 defense. I wouldn't bet on it, but there's potential there. So yeah, maybe that's a path forward for them.
Wes, let me ask you one last question. I'll ask the same thing to the West too. Just aside from aside from the Celtics, which of these teams from like just an aesthetic standpoint are you most excited to watch?
Oh, the Pacers. Yeah. They're so much fun to watch. I love watching the Pacers. Rick Carlisle always has some great wrinkles there. Pascal Siakam and Tyrese Halliburton for a full season is going to be awesome. I'm really intrigued to see Philadelphia, what Paul George looks like there, what that process ends up being like. And beyond that, that's really it. What about you?
Indiana's the obvious answer. I cannot wait to watch the Orlando Magic just grind teams into dust.
All right, have fun with that.
But I'm just like the bad teams in the league when it's like a 5-man lineup. It's like Mo Wagner at center because I think there's it just feels like a Wendell Carter trade is out there somewhere to like go get it something else. But it's like Suggs, KCP, Franz, Paolo, and like pick whatever center. Maybe it's Wendell.
But Jonathan Isaac, when they put that out there,
or Jonathan Isaac. It's like, are they going to score 86 points per possessions? Maybe. Are they going to hold teams to 50 points per possessions? Also maybe. And
Jalen Suggs is one of my favorite players in the NBA to watch. I love watching him play defense. I haven't enjoyed watching a guard play defense as much as Jalen Suggs since like New Orleans Pelicans Drew Holiday.
Yeah. He is an absolute terror.
And he cares. Remember last year, the beginning of last year, the Magic lose to the Lakers in a really close game that was pretty surprising. And he cried at the end of the first game because he was just so passionate and that disappointed that they lost game 1 of the season.
Yeah, I'm a big Jalen Suggs guy. Big fan of what Suggs is up to there. So that's our Eastern Conference tiers. To recap, top of the table, class of their own, we have the Boston Celtics. In the could push the Celtics tier, we have the Indiana Pacers, who we added in real time. We have the Philadelphia 76ers. We have the Milwaukee Bucks, and we have the New York Knicks. Then in the middle class, we've got the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Miami Heat, and the Orlando Magic. Teams that suck a little bit less than the bottom of the barrel teams, we have Chicago, Toronto, Atlanta, and Charlotte. And then the dregs of the league, who we did cover last week in an episode I really liked where we got into who actually needs to be bad this year, aka who needs Cooper Flag, so go check that out. We have the Brooklyn Nets, the Detroit Pistons, and the Washington Wizards. The West is going to be much more of a gauntlet, I think, when we get there.
That one's going to be tougher. Yep.
A little bit more of a lot more teams I really like in the West. There's only 2 teams. We might
even be wearing the same clothes in that episode for some reason.
Yeah. You know what? I'm a big transparency guy, Wes. So I want to be transparent to our viewers and our listeners. We're bulk recording 2 episodes for this week when they're coming out because I have a work trip and I will be flying across the country to a bunch of places and don't have time to do my side hustle awesome Just Basketball podcast with Wes. So we recorded ahead of time. So there you go. That's why we're in the same clothes and I haven't shaved. So we'll talk to you then. Western Conference up next. A lot more to come. Enjoy the hoops. Talk to you soon. Use our promo code JustBasketball at BetMGM. Get that first bet offer. We'll talk to you soon.